For me, the number one priority, without and anything else a long way behind, was to win the war. So that there was never any sort of thing of to say, Mama, well, you know, it's all very well, but what about the revolution? I mean, if it got to anything, I would say turn around. I, in my mind, would have said to myself, fuck the revolution, we've got to beat Franco first, and that's going to be one hell of a job, as we very quickly discovered. Well, my parents were emigre, were born in Poland, a Polish Jewish family who came to England quite separately, although they were from the same village in southern Poland, from the province of Galicia. My father was he began as a mechanic for the Singer sewing machine company, which is an American company which had big branches all over the world. But then he set up on his own and then did various things until finishing up with a shop in South Hackney in London. I was born in Stepney, and then we moved to South Hackney, and I went to school there. As happened in many Jewish families at that time, apart from going to school, you had to go to Hebrew classes, where which was run under the auspices of the local synagogue, but like a sort of Sunday school and church. And my father was very insistent, because he had studied. It wasn't just a sort of Saturday morning synagogue with him. It was he was a very religious person, brought up as one, and so from his own studies and as a boy, was capable of testing me at weekends as to what I had learned at the Hebrew classes, and if he thought that I wasn't satisfactory, I got a good clumping. I suppose my mind began to change really when I was still at school. You can't put a thing like that on. And it could be that it was also just laziness, that the religious duties involved, and I didn't want to go to synagogue and had other things I wanted to do. And perhaps if my father had held on to his strict religious observance at the time, it would have been different, but he was in a way drifting away from this thing. The other thing was that it was at a time when of the economic recession, large-scale unemployment. Frequently, groups of miners, particularly from South Wales, would come to London, in fact begging in the street. And I suppose in a way my left-wing views were more fostered in the history teaching at George Green's. There was a history teacher who was very much bringing out, it wasn't just with her, a sort of list of kings and queens of England, but very much directing our attention to the social background of historical movements and that, which also made. But the other influence on me at that time was, of course, the growing fascist movement. Mosley's black shirts were recruiting, and very effectively, in that part of London, because in South Hackney it was very near to Stepney and the whole of that East End area with a large Jewish population. And I suppose if I thought of anything of what I was going to do, it would have been history teaching in a vague sort of way. But I did get a scholarship to University College London in Gower Street, and there my main subject was history. Very soon was made aware of the existence of a Communist Party group in University College, which I eventually joined. But I also naturally made friends on the left in the college debating society, where I spoke from time to time. Well, a friend of mine, chap I got friendly with in the history department, who was also very left-wing, various talks we had and things, and he was interested in military matters, so we decided to join the OTC. Now, this is a paradox, because given the fact that the Communist Party, certainly in a large part of the Labour Party, was absolutely opposed to these things, how was it that I, having become joined a communist group of communist students, joining the OTC? I can't explain that. I mean, wonder why I wasn't expelled from the Communist Party right away. The other thing that made people laugh, really, was a bit of a joke, was how was it that the OTC people, don't forget that the OTC it wasn't just some sort of play-about thing, it was an official organisation of the War Office, Ministry of Defence, and people would say, well, why did they take a couple of vultures like you? The only explanation I can give is that they were so hard up for recruits, they would take any bugger. And I must say that I enjoyed it. We had regular drills, rifle drill and what's called square bashing. There were from time to time camps, weekend camps, at a place in Prince's Risborough, the outskirts of London, where we did rifle practice and rifle drill, and also training in machine guns, Lewis submachine gun, and the Vickers heavy machine gun, water-cooled gun on a tripod, which was being developed by the Army, British Army at that time. I went to university in 1933, the year that Hitler came to power in Germany. And the development of the black shirt movement in this country was not restricted to Victoria Park. The finances that were made available to Sir Oswald Mosley enabled him to provide a uniform for a considerable body of men and women. who marched through the streets. And certainly they concentrated a lot of their activities in that part of London where I lived. But also, at one stage, we had there was an incident when a number of students at University College turned up at college in black shirts, and this created quite to do. Fortunately, at the initiative of the provost, the head of University College, the authorities there decided that students were not allowed to parade in or turn up at university in black shirts. But they were there. And I had attended a few of the mostly demonstrations in London, and particularly there was one at Olympia, the Olympia one, which was a very well staged thing by Mosley, and the Albert Hall, where I distinguished myself by being chucked out, manhandled by anybody who got up to ask a question, or that would be pounced on them by the heavies and thugs that Mosley were an important part of them, thrown out. The Spanish War had started in July, and we had a meeting of the communist students, and there came to the meeting a chap who was the national student organiser of the Communist Party, a chap called Jack Cohen. And why he hadn't sort of reported me for being in the OTC was against all Communist Party ideas, but there was some discussion, and then the talk turned to Spain and that. He said, well, recruiting people to go to Spain, and especially people like you with military knowledge, would be very useful. Talking with Jack Cohen afterwards, that the possibility that here we were trying to deal with the fascist threat in our own streets, shouldn't it, that if one was able to prevent fascism from winning in Spain, it would be an important setback of the danger of fascism in this country. Well, when we went to Spain, I was with was a member of the first group of British volunteers who went to Spain. We didn't have a great deal of time to start, discussing the pros and cons of the war. Spain was a medieval town, country, where we went into the countryside to the small villages around Albacete, where we did what training we were able to get before we were thrown into battle, where people were living in places that were like pigsties. And there was only one building of any sort in this town, small town, and that was the church. And the church was absolutely 100% in support of the rich and the powerful, and the absentee landlords who absolutely enslaved agricultural workers who were the source of the wealth and power of the Spanish ruling class. So that when we began and talked with young Spaniards who were in the army, we could see for ourselves what was happening. Ideals. Yes, the ideal that we had was this was a progressive government which needed to be supported, but mainly, as far as I was concerned, to beat fascism. When we marched out of the North Station in Madrid, that November dawn when we came out off the trains and we marched up the Grand Via in Madrid, and they all said, "Son los Rusos!" The Russians had come. Well, they soon discovered we weren't Russians, but we did our bit.